Welcome to the podcast Above the Cloud, Stories from the Boardroom. In every episode, we interview business leaders who are navigating the complex world of B2B marketing. Whether you're trying to grow revenue, swoop into a new market, or launch new products, we promise you've landed in the right spot. And now your host, Richard Bird.
In this episode, we bring you Claire Burtin, Head of Strategy and Planning for Hydrogen North America of John Cockerill. All right, Claire, thank you for joining us today. I'm really glad to have you on Above the Clouds podcast. How are you today?
Hi, Richard. I'm very glad I'm sharing this episode with you as well. Doing fantastic.
All right, great. Well, we like to kick off these Above the Clouds podcasts with a trick question. So if your company was a bird, what kind of bird would your company be?
So that's for testing our skills in biology as well during the podcast. So I think if our company would be a bird, would be a ptarmigan. And so this bird is a bird that lives in very high mountains and that changes its feathers during winter. And I think so I've picked this one because I think it embodies the changing landscape in which our company is operating, constantly, transitioning, innovating, and supporting our customers in their energy transition goals. So that's, same as, a bird needing to change feathers, adapting to circumstances of the environment.
Wow, that's great. That's a great answer. That's the best one so far, I think. I love it. And I've never heard of that. I heard of that bird. So that's cool.
And this one lives in North America as well.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. But I like when I've ever gone hiking up in the mountains, I see the birds and the wildlife that are up there. And I think, man, how do these things make it? How do they live here whenever the, winter comes and everything's covered in snow? So there you go. That's how that one lives, right? Changes its feathers.
Yeah. It turns into white feathers to mimic the color of snow just to escape the predators.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I'm going to do some research on that. That sounds great. Cool. Well, I guess, Claire, why don't you walk us through, your career? I know you haven't been a lifelong marketer like myself. And I know when you were in high school and you're thinking about what you wanted to be when you grow up, I'm sure you weren't thinking I want to be a marketer for a hydrogen electrolyzer company. Yeah. Walk me through how you got here.
Yeah, that's not the job you would thought about when you were 12. But my background. So I went to an engineering school. So my background is pretty much technical. And the funny story is that I didn't know what I wanted to do back in, at the end of my engineering master. And I did my master thesis on hydrogen almost 10 years ago. And it was pretty small market, pretty new for everyone. And at the end, I was thinking, okay, I did my master in renewable energy. I might go to work in solar industry or wind industry because it's much more, developed. And I was like, it was so tough to do the thesis. I probably won't work in hydrogen because there are not a lot of opportunities. But it turned out that I found a job in hydrogen, and then I stayed in this sector ever since. So working for different organizations in different roles, business development, project management, strategy, but all the time on hydrogen.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool that you're able to focus on the industry, but have had exciting jobs within that industry. Where'd you get your start in hydrogen? Was it in sales or project management? How'd it go?
I started in business development for a small startup, and I've always worked, in environments where, and I guess it's also due to the nature of this industry, which is new. So I've always worked on different tasks within the same, role. So when I was doing business development, I was also working on market analysis. So always close to, hydrogen markets. And I guess that's, how I end up marketing hydrogen and electrolyzers for John Cockerill now.
That's cool. I think about, business development is such a useful skill when you want to understand a market and you want to understand the customers and how they think and how they buy and all those things. So I've noticed that when salespeople or people in business development get into marketing, they have really good luck because they know their audience and what moves them, what motivates them. So that's pretty cool that you were able to do that. And I think also, when you work for a startup, it teaches you a lot because you have to wear a lot of hats and figure out things. And you don't come from a embarrassment of riches of resources. You have to kind of figure out how to work with what you got.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, tell me a little bit about John Cockerill.
So John Cockerill is a Belgium company. The group has been around for more than 200 years now, so it's almost older than the United States of America. Yeah. We are developing mostly large-scale technological solutions globally. We have so I'm working for the hydrogen division, but we do have other divisions in industry, energy, defense, environment, across different geographies. So we also have activities in the industry and energy sectors in the US. And as far as our main goal as a large scale, mainly large scale technology provider, is to support our customers in their energy transition goals. So basically through the environmental transition, how they can reduce their carbon footprint. And the hydrogen division is one of these, new businesses, as we can call them, to support this goal. So for hydrogen, we are manufacturing electrolyzers. And so electrolyzers are the equipment that you will need to produce hydrogen using only electricity and water. So it's a very specific technology. And the objective is to sell them and deploy them in large scale projects to produce massive amounts of hydrogen for example feeding into chemical processes or energy processes.
Yeah, and that I think that is as we've learned about your company and everything, we're looking at your website and we're like, oh my gosh, these guys do everything. They make tanks and they're in the energy sector, and just seems like such a wide array, but also very niche products. It's a really interesting company, and with such a rich history that we were really, I was really excited to have you on the podcast to talk about this. The hydrogen electrolyzer portion of the company is interesting because I think about, when people think about hydrogen, I think a lot of times they think about hydrogen cars or these kinds of things in the transport industry. But you guys have take a little bit of different approach to that. Do you mind walking us through that?
Yeah. So basically, I think it's more like historically in Europe and in the US, hydrogen was more seen for the renewable, the energy transition and decarbonizing some sectors. Cars were the first target for hydrogen. But historically, hydrogen has been used for decades in very large industrial processes. So, for example, you need hydrogen in refineries to process oil. You would need hydrogen to produce ammonia. You need hydrogen in some chemical processes. So, worldwide, hydrogen is widely used in a lot of different sectors. But mostly this hydrogen is produced using natural gas or fossil resources. And our let's say angle here is to provide solution for these large industries to decarbonize their operations by providing a way to produce hydrogen in a clean way using only electricity and water. Because when you produce hydrogen using natural gas, you emit around 9 to 10 kilos of CO2 per kilo of hydrogen you produce, which is, a massive amount of CO2. And transitioning to electrolyzers and other ways of producing hydrogen helps your business to reduce their emissions.
Wow, that is pretty cool. And I think that is, I think it's so interesting to learn how industries work. And when you hear about hydrogen, my mind went, like you said earlier, straight to cars and not, and the clean energy environment and, all those kinds of things is supposed to, how important of an ingredient hydrogen is in so many different industries. So, and I think about how do you produce that in a clean way, in a sustainable way, and it can be challenging, right?
It's challenging, and one thing I wanted to add about your around the question about cars and the hydrogen sector in general. When you first think about hydrogen, and at some point, it was pushed by different governments and kind of like marketed as the solution for the energy transition. So there was a moment 2 or 3 years ago where everyone wanted to use hydrogen for something. So you could, because it's true, you can use hydrogen to produce power for your home. You can use hydrogen to heat buildings. You can use hydrogen for your car. You can use hydrogen for producing fuels like e-fuels or for aviation, for example, sustainable aviation fuels. You can use it as an input into chemical processes, as I mentioned. And so there was a point at which you could use hydrogen almost everywhere, but not all those cases made sense economically and environmentally. Yes. So that was also the focus of the whole industry to kind of figure it out. What were the business cases where you have willingness to pay from the customer, but also realistic way of hydrogen being almost the only solution to decarbonize. For example, for car, you have electric cars that are developed, have been developed quite well in the past years. And, hydrogen is complementary to electricity uses, but there are some cases in which it makes more sense to use electricity rather than hydrogen and vice versa.
Yeah, that's right. I think that that's always the tricky part with new energy sources or clean energy is figuring out the economics. When does it make sense? How do you make the economics work? Because I think we've looked at e-fuels in the past and we've worked with clients in that space. And, all of a sudden, you go, well, I don't think anybody wants to pay $40 a gallon for for this fuel. Maybe a bit. No matter how much you want to save the environment or how environmentally conscious you are, that the economics do weigh in, right?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Well, tell us what's your day-to-day like in your marketing role at John Cockerill? What is it? Is it? I'm sure it's the same thing day in, day out. No?
Of course. No. So obviously a lot of discussion with customers to understand the needs, and as I mentioned, the market is moving quite fast. So you always have to be really close to what's happening, to understand the trends, to understand the needs of the customers as well. And it's not just the market that's evolving. You have like new incentives from governments I won't say every day because now the pace is a bit slower, but you have new incentives and that can have an impact at global level in the sense that if Japan is setting up subsidies for importing clean hydrogen, this would have an impact on American projects who would be willing to export hydrogen to Japan and benefit from these subsidies. And this could change the way they design their project or the type of technology they would like for producing hydrogen. So basically, it's staying up to date on all these changes. I'm also working a bit on, public affairs strategy for the company as well. That's a bit aside of, the pure marketing work.
Yeah, I think that's got to be a big challenge for you guys, that it's such a technical sell and it's something that people aren't used to buying right now. That is something that you have to they're trying to figure out what their buying process is for hydrogen electrolyzer and what that supply chain looks like. And so I can imagine that you have to really do have to bring in a whole team in order to close a deal.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the the main challenges we could face in our market today regarding sales and marketing, is the fact that as it's a new market, everyone is progressing along the way. So customers who are designing projects, sometimes they don't really know what they really need for their projects, because they cannot be experts in the full value chain of a hydrogen project. So we are the electrolyzer expert, and one of our mission or challenge for as far as marketing and sales are concerned is to help them navigate this complex topic and help them understand what are the characteristics of our equipment that are going to help them in their project, or what they should change in the design of their project to better fit the characteristic of our equipment and make their operation smoother in the end. So that's this whole setup obviously takes time, and it's much more difficult than selling something that I don't know, you buy a car, you have like a list of features that you want to look for, and you know exactly what you want. In that case, you don't really know what you need, and you need some help to figure out what would be the best car for the type of use you will need figuratively.
You guys have a very consultative sell, I guess, without saying, or maybe as an understatement. How receptive are your customers and prospects to taking your input in that along the way in that sales journey?
I think the industry overall is pretty open to getting some expertise from different bodies, so it's going pretty well. And I think one of the reasons why it's going that way is that as the industry is, let's say, building itself up, it's very important to consider the relationship rather than like being a partnership, rather than being just a customer provider type of relationship, because everything is new. So you need to be sure you are together with a partner who can support you, because it's not just about selling something. Maybe the customer is going to change his project in 3 months, and they will need to have some flexibility from the provider side. So if you are in a contracted relationship that's set up and that cannot change, this is going to be a problem in the future, even during the sales process. So you need to be really in a relationship where everyone understands everyone and trust the other parties, and both customers but other partners involved in the process, like engineering companies, are pretty open to get insights from electrolyzer providers, but also other parties or stakeholders in the value chain to make the project happen, rather than just stay in a closed sales cycle, not taking any inputs from outside, especially not from your vendor, and just doing your own thing, because the industry I think is not ready for that yet. And we need to work all together to, as partners, to make the whole thing happen.
Wow, that's a really interesting approach to that, because a lot of your customers they're big companies with very robust procurement processes, and we sell to the same kind of clients, and I know that we're going through that procurement phase. They're like, no, this, you got to give us the specs to the exact detail, and then we're going to hold you to that, and you can't change once you get in.
We do have that. I mean, it's not like everything is not fixed. We do have, to answer requests for proposal with very detailed technical requirements, and provide data and answers on very, deep technical level of questions. But I guess what I'm saying is more on the initial phases of a project where, a customer is just considering different type of, for example, electrolyzer technologies, and they think that this one might be better for their projects because that's what they've heard. And, they are not experts in that specific technology. So what we do is providing them with more insights on exactly what this and this technology can provide to them and what would be the pros and cons of each technology for their specific project. And that's more, and so that way they can sometimes redesign or rethink the way they want to set up their project or to operate their project, to make sure, everything's going to work smoothly in the end.
Yeah. And I think the other thing you mentioned in there too was that the other people, involved in that, putting together a massive project like that, you got to make sure that they're in the loop and that, everyone is connected. That's an interesting way of doing it, because I think a lot of times in those industrial settings, people kind of stay in their own lanes, but that's not possible in your industry, right?
Yeah, it's at least for the first project, it will be more collaborative than siloed work from every company.
Yeah. So that's a big challenge, is this, immature market. It sounds like it probably has a pretty long sales cycle as well. How long does it usually take to close a project out?
So that's true. It's a very long sales cycle, and it's mostly due to what I just mentioned, that, the customer is kind of building their design of the project, the first engineering studies. So they need inputs from suppliers, but they're not ready yet to take a decision on the technology. And this can last, depending on the project, and also depending on the size of the project, obviously, between, I would say, 1.5 to 3 years. So it's a pretty long sales cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, that is, I think you guys take the cake. That's one of the longer ones we've heard of. That is, I think that's challenging. I think that's one of the things that about this podcast and why we started it, is we wanted to talk to people that are, marketing different, and selling, things that are challenging, so we won't have, people from beer companies or car companies, that are easy to people to understand and sell. But, and so this is this one is, close to the top of challenging things to sell, I would think.
Yeah, sure. But, if you think about it, it's like, I think it's easier to sell than a nuclear power plant. So it depends on which scales you're looking.
Yeah.
But basically, when you sell just one piece of one electrolyzer, it's our just smallest electrolyzer is 5 megawatts, and it's a device that weighs around 60 tons. It's like 2 meters, I don't know, in inches or feet diameters.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty large piece of industrial equipment, and you want to run that and to produce hydrogen for over 10, 15 years. So it's not a small piece of equipment. And the other thing as well is, when you want to set up a hydrogen production plant, the electrolyzer is the core of your plant. If your electrolyzer fails, you don't have any hydrogen produced. So, for example, if you sell hydrogen to an ammonia plant, you cannot sell anymore. So your whole business plan is threatened if you have a problem with your electrolyzer. So you want to make a good choice when you select your electrolyzer provider for these reasons.
Oh yeah, I can see reliability would be super important. I wonder, and these are high priced items as well too. So redundancy might be a difficult thing for people to do if they don't have the right scale, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
What about, I guess the other thing that I think about is a challenge in your industry is, not everybody woke up this morning and said, hey, I need a hydrogen electrolyzer. How many projects are people talking about globally? Even, I mean, it seems like if this is about as niche an industry as you could get.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's true in a sense. But on the other hand, you have a lot of, I mean, even if the number of players is small, and I don't have a number in mind, but I can give you a number of projects that are currently under development that have been counted by the Hydrogen Council. And I think now we have more than 1,500 projects.
Wow.
Worldwide. So that's not, as selling beers as you said, but that's still a lot of different projects from a lot of different players. So it's a small audience, but the market is still large enough to play.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you've learned a lot in your role here. What's one thing that you've learned that you wish you would have learned that you would have known on day one of your role?
On the first answer, I would say nothing, because it's better to try and fail and learn along the way.
Yeah.
And I won't change that about my experience. But I think one of the things that I've realized in my role is the fact that for the difference between marketing and communication. And I know for Americans, it's easier to understand that difference. But coming with an engineering background from Europe and working in a very industrial company, it's not that clear. But marketing and communication do require very different skill sets. And for our industry specifically, it's crucial to have to understand well both the market dynamics and the technical elements in order to be able to market product.
Yeah, no, that's an important distinction. And, I think that, we work with a lot of companies and international companies, and we've seen a similar trend. I think that communications people are really good at, coming up with a big corporate message or a big theme for the year, or, managing the messaging at trade shows and maintaining the website and doing press releases and those kinds of things. But you're right. When you get into marketing, I think marketing people are a little more commercially motivated, and they're not afraid to get in the weeds and, mix it up with salespeople.
Very often we put communication and marketing in the same bucket. When you really look at it, should be marketing and sales together rather than communication. I mean, in my view, in the sense that marketing is really a tool for supporting sales.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, that's our view here too, is that, marketing and sales are two sides of the same coin. I think that, you can talk broader from a marketing perspective, but always with that commercial intent behind what you're trying to do, and recognize where the money is, and help salespeople through a 3-year sales cycle. Those kinds of things where salespeople definitely need sales, air support is what we call it, in those long sales cycles, and help with good content that's going to motivate the customer and all those kinds of things. So
yeah, that's true.
Nice. Well, tell me a little bit about the hydrogen industry, and what are the biggest misconceptions in the hydrogen industry, would you say?
So I think one of the misconceptions is the one I mentioned earlier about the fact that you can use hydrogen everywhere, which is true in a sense, but you have to pick your cases and use it wisely, I would say. And the other topic is misconception is some things that we hear from time to time and question about hydrogen. Is it a real thing? Is it going to take off? Is it really going to be used somewhere? And I mentioned that earlier. Hydrogen is widely used in different industries, but not green hydrogen. And so that's what we're trying to develop more and more. But hydrogen is already well used, but not well known by the main public. I would say more by the industry that are using it. And even if you just take the green hydrogen development, yes, as I mentioned, this is an industry that's growing. So in some ways, you need to learn, you need to scale up. But when you look at the pace of the scale up, it's still much faster than what we've seen in the wind and the solar industry some years ago. And it took for wind and solar decades to scale up to several gigawatt scale plants. So it's not going to happen in one night for hydrogen either, and that I think is important to understand. But a lot of hydrogen detractors and some people working in fossil fuel industry who are willing to keep using gray hydrogen or other fossil resources are mentioning that hydrogen is taking too long and it's never going to happen. But when you look at oil and gas industry, it's the same. It took decades to develop all the infrastructure for natural gas, for the oil drilling and refueling stations and so on. So I think we need to take a step back and reconsider the timescale of development and just acknowledge the fact that hydrogen is still developing at a much faster pace than other technologies, even though it still seems small. And I think what's encouraging in engineers, so I love data. I think what's encouraging is looking at the numbers. And when you look at the numbers, global investment in hydrogen grew 7-fold in the last 4 years.
Wow.
And projects that have reached final investment decision quadrupled in the past 4 years, which is, very impressive. And as I mentioned, the current pipeline globally is about 1,500 projects, when it was only 200 in 2021. So you can see the curve almost when I say the numbers.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to understand. That's happening. Hydrogen is happening. Hydrogen is going to be a key element in our energy future. We need hydrogen to decarbonize some sectors that cannot be decarbonized otherwise. So hydrogen is going to happen. And yes, it's going to take time because, as everything, it won't be built in one day.
Wow. Well, those are remarkable proof points. And, it's interesting too that, that people have that thought that, that it's not going fast enough. It just, in lieu of those numbers, it just goes to show you, I think our expectations today are, as citizens and as people, is nothing can happen fast enough, right? But it's interesting, when you point out that the oil and gas industry, is one that really, took decades and decades to do that. And I think one thing that's interesting to me is the hydrogen industry can use some of that infrastructure that's already in place from the oil and gas industry. And so to leverage that and piggyback off of that can be very, very powerful.
Of course. And it's, especially in the US, hydrogen is a very large existing market in the US. And so there is already existing hydrogen infrastructure, for example, in Texas, where we're from,
Yeah.
where we're located as John Cockerill Hydrogen North America. This is one of the largest pipeline network of pure hydrogen that is already in use in Texas today, using hydrogen that's produced from fossil fuels, but could also accommodate hydrogen produced from other technologies.
Yeah, the other thing too that I think about with hydrogen is, people talk about green hydrogen and gray hydrogen and all the different colors in the rainbow, right? But if you are looking to abate an industry and just get an improvement. Blue hydrogen using, natural gas is not a bad way to go as well. I mean, you can really reduce the a heavy emitters.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, and especially in the US, I think we're going to see a lot of blue hydrogen because of the existing infrastructure, as I mentioned, and the fact that there are a lot of hydrogen producers already established that can just add carbon capture to their process to mitigate their emissions.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to get there, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, when you think about the heavy emitters that you mentioned, I think there are certain industries that are just very difficult to abate. Steel and cement and all these industries that are going to be super important as time goes on. What about your offering? Do you guys kind of cater to any of those particular industries, or your technology, how does it apply to those heavy emitter industries?
So basically, our equipment is just producing hydrogen, and then you can use hydrogen in whichever process you want. So for steel, cement, for producing alternative fuels, it is the same. But basically, our offering is really geared towards these large users. So just, a few words. So we have like a very large stack, which is the first block, let's say, of the electrolyzer system, which enable us to then add more blocks to the first block and kind of build larger plants more easily. And our objective is really to deliver on, projects that are, 100 and plus megawatts, which is not a quantity of hydrogen you would need for fueling a car,
Yeah.
but hydrogen that you would need as an input for a process like a production of ammonia of several tons per day. So that's our target, and basically we design our product to be able to address the needs of this specific industry.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that is, if you think about it from a green perspective, or that's where you should start, right? If any project you're working on, you're going to start with where you can have the most impact. And those are the industries I think certainly will provide the most impact to, for environmental concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. And we already have customers in these industries.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Gonna save the world.
With hydrogen.
Yeah, with hydrogen, of course. Where do you see your industry going over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's a good question. So, again, if you look at the numbers today worldwide, there are less than 2 gigawatts of electrolyzers installed, which means, the actual production of hydrogen from electrolyzers represents less than 2 gigawatts. And if you look at announcements from different governments and targets of different, regions, there is a potential for reaching 135 gigawatts by 2030, which is,
wow,
a huge step.
Yeah, yeah.
And so basically, because of, all this, support from governments and willingness from different industries, but also sometimes, even targets, CO2 reduction targets from specific industries, like you mentioned, steel. The International Maritime Organization also published, targets for CO2 reductions, and for these industries, hydrogen could play a role. So this is also a good opportunity for the sector. So I think the industry is going to scale up step by step, and maybe address new market like I mentioned, maritime industry, shipping, international shipping. And the industry will definitely get, more structured than what it is right now, in the sense, what we mentioned earlier about going, providing a lot of educational content for customers, helping along all the steps of the projects through the design of the projects with project developers. This will be less and less I would say, useful because, after, you see a few projects up and running, then you know how to do it and you don't need that support anymore.
Yeah. No, that is, it's really interesting. That would be a remarkable scale. Do you see any challenges with being able to meet that demand?
Well, I think, and that's, one of the things we focus on today, within our organization to be able to be there in 2030, I would say, is first focusing on delivering on the current projects, because this demand of 135 gigawatts is going to materialize only if the first projects are successful. And if, it's not like we're going from 2 gigawatt and tomorrow we're delivering projects for 135 gigawatt. It will be step by step, learning curve, going through the learning curve. And if you don't walk that walk, you won't be there in 10 years.
Yeah.
So I think the focus, right. And that's, I think, the most challenging part, because everyone wants to think about the big project in 10 years and everyone wants to see that happen. But if you want to see that happen, you need to do the job right now. So you need to, implement projects, get return on experience, build on that, and then build on everything, like reduce the costing, improve the reliability, improve the performance, improve everything. So you be able to deliver, very high performance, cost-effective solutions in 10 years.
Yeah. I think that is something that's so true of all the industries that you guys serve, is those companies are very disciplined and they are conservative in many regards, and because a lot is at stake in their industries. And I think that they're going to want to try, pilot projects and expand as opposed to go all in on one thing. And so, being able to get those proof of concepts, get those early projects, prove the reliability, and I think also there's a big flex in your industry. Some people are interested in electrolyzers and hydrogen electrolyzers, and some people are interested in different other technologies like PEM and, some of these other, items like you mentioned earlier. I think they're going to want to prove out the use cases for all of those. They're going to want to understand that they have partners, in that industry, and prove all that stuff out before they,
Exactly. But I and that's why I think the next, 5 years are going to be super interesting from that standpoint. Because as you mentioned, there are several technologies on the market, different players, and we will see, maybe one technology will be preferred for a specific use case and another one for another use case. I don't know, maybe we will see that there is no point in using green hydrogen for a certain type of industry because there are electrification is available and it's more cost effective or whatever. So we're going to see that, happening in the coming years. And to your point, I think one of the challenges as well, from what you mentioned, going from like small pilot project to very large, like first on pilot project and then build on larger projects, is also the challenge of the supply chain. You want, because it's not just about, building projects, you need to have the whole supply chain ready in the background. So you need, to provide all the different pieces to build equipment, but also the balance of the plant. So you need, different elements like compressors and other devices, for providing electricity and so on. And you need to be able to source this equipment. You also need to be able to have people who are trained and skilled to operate your plant. And so this is going to also take some time to build this whole chain. So you need to, you cannot start with a very, very large project because you don't have that available. You don't have 200 people or I don't know how many you need for your plant, but available and already trained and skilled and knowing everything about hydrogen and how to operate a hydrogen plant. You need to start small and then ramp up and support the whole value chain ramp up as well.
Oh man. Wow. So I guess, as you think about we've talked a little about the challenges on the business development and sales side, but on the marketing side, it's, it seems like there's a lot of storytelling that needs to happen, and I think, and you mentioned education a lot, and I think that educational content around, why this technology is better for these situations than this technology is for those situations, or those kinds of things. How are you going about that in your organization?
So basically, I would say that's most of the marketing content we're creating right now and we're focusing on is around that educational content. So we are producing blog posts on our website with the intent of them being available for everyone. And we cover topics such as, what's the difference between this technology and that technology? What are the advantages, for example, of having a local supplier? What do you need to look after when you're selecting a specific technology? And one other thing we did that's linked to that educational content is we did a webinar last year that did very well. And the topic was, how you could calculate the levelized cost of hydrogen, which is a metric our customer used to compare different technologies. And basically, the levelized cost of hydrogen is how much does it cost you to produce 1 kilo of hydrogen. So you have to take into account all the elements of your plant, including the electrolyzer system, but also, how much your electricity costs, how much it will cost for you to build your plant and operate the plant and so on. And so basically what we've recognized during our discussions with customers is that sometimes it's difficult to understand what should be taken into account in that calculation. And so the webinar was about, kind of reviewing all the elements that you need to, kind of a checklist of what you would need to do an assessment that's realistic and precise enough for what you need it for. And it did pretty well. So we had a lot of attendance. It was a record attendance for the webinar platform, which is a really, really good thing for us, but also shows the need from the industry to get more content like that and get more guidance from experts on specific topics.
Yeah, no, that sounds like very useful content that, your customers, they need to understand that and they don't have a good grip on it. And so I think, having content like that clients will, or prospects will see and go, wow, I need to learn more about this is, there's obviously a good draw to bring them in, but then also, once you bring them in, I think it's going to help to position you as thought leaders at John Cockerill, which is really important. Because I think one interesting thing that about John Cockerill is the way that, you're a European company, but you reach out and go into new markets outside of Europe, where, in Europe you have a remarkable brand, 200 years old, and people know who you are. But when you go into another country like America, and you have to compete with some other international brands that maybe have more brand awareness than you, I think that's a really smart way to build your credibility with a new audience.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess as you've kind of moved into that market and you're doing projects like this, have you seen your brand awareness increase in the US?
Yes, and one of the topic I thought about when you said that is we also realize, and this is linked to the misconception of some misconception within the industry, is that in the US, for example, there was a lot of PEM oriented projects because so PEM is another technology. So we are developing alkaline technology, which is electrolyzer specific subcategory, and in the US, most of the manufacturers in the US are developing PEM. So basically all project developers were, first assessing PEM and not even thinking about alkaline. Whereas, in the rest of the world, alkaline is the most widespread technology with most, track record and so on. So when we arrived in that market, we like people didn't know about John Cockerill and they didn't really know about alkaline, or if they knew, they thought it was not as good or as efficient or whatever as PEM. So one of the work we did as well was to kind of like deconstruct all these beliefs around PEM and around alkaline, and just try to bring an objective view of the two technologies. And also one of the reasons why it was like that is because the technology is evolving so fast that you cannot stay on what you've heard 2 years ago, because this is changing so fast. And so what we've seen that now in the US, we are getting more and more customers contacting us directly because now they know who we are. We did some events in North America as well. And now that we have a team locally and that we are preparing our manufacturing facility in Texas as well, they are getting more and more interested in having a local supplier, local team, leveraging global experience and global projects with a good track record globally.
Wow, that's great. That's good to hear. I wonder, when you think about all the challenges and headwinds you face in that industry to market and to develop that market and build your brand. You had some pretty significant challenges, and you've really made some good headway against that. What advice would you give to other marketers who are also maybe in challenging markets like you are?
I would tell them to be open and creative. I think it's always interesting to look at what has been done in other industries and in other parts of the world. And sometimes you can get ideas from another industry that's selling beers or whatever, and you just try to tweak the idea and make it applicable for your specific case. And I think in that way you can bring some something new to your customer that might benefit them.
Yeah, that's great. Any tactics you're looking forward to, adding to your some of the things you talked about earlier, like your webinars and written long form content? What else are you excited about, tapping into from a marketing perspective?
I'm excited about all the new technology we can use. We are more and more connected in our everyday life with phones and so on. And, trends like geofencing and this type of, new tools that we can use to market. I think it's going to be really interesting, and it's tools that are fun to try and test and see, the impact you can have with them.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that's the right approach, right? Just like your clients, they start small and then do and increase it if it works. And if they feel confident in it, and I think that's that's that fail fast approach in marketing, where you can dabble a bit in things and try it out, especially, I think one of the things you mentioned earlier that's so true is it's a very green market. And, some things that you don't know exactly what's going to work from a marketing perspective, as well,
exactly.
Are your people.
I think that's what makes marketing interesting as well, is the fact that you can try and fail fast. So, even if the sales cycle is very long, like 2-3 years, you can still try several different approaches and see if you have success with them. And if you find, the good spot, then you just keep going. And you don't have to wait 1 year to see if your marketing strategy is working. Yeah.
No, that's right. You can sprinkle a little bit of money and test different channels, test different audiences. And I think that is, it's another interesting thing too, when you have a green market, you have a big buying committee, and, how do you get those people and, all those different people involved into your messaging and all that. And so exploring those and being agile with your approach to the different channels and things like that can be very valuable for companies like you.
Yeah.
Cool. What about new people, that are getting into marketing and, and are looking at this as a career? I think it's interesting because we work with so many technical people on this podcast and, talk to them, that they never set out to be a marketer. And then they, found themselves in a marketing role for whatever reason, like we talked about with you earlier. What about the young marketing person that is in high school going, I want to go into marketing? What advice would you give them?
Try different, industries, stay curious. And, yeah, I think stay curious and try things. I think it's, as I mentioned, I think would be, if you have some internships to do, for example, in marketing, I would try very total different industries just to see how things are done in a B2C industry, then a B2B with very long sales cycles, just to see, or even like selling something or marketing something that's not fancy to market, I would say, versus something that's, like beer or whatever, that's are easier to market in a certain way. And I think, just, having fun along the way and finding, some interest in searching for the perfect marketing strategy.
Yeah, I like it. I think that the marketing is, if you're not having fun when you're doing marketing, then you're just not doing it right.
That's true.
Cool. Well, Claire, it was really great having you on the podcast. Do you have any last parting words for our audience?
So I have a question for you, Richard. What's the most challenging for you as, a marketing company when you support companies like John Cockerill with, knowing all our challenges, long sales cycles, and, small audience? How do you deal with it?
Well, that's a good question. And I think that is something we start off by trying to understand the offering. And sometimes for our clients, it can be a little challenging, a lot of technical offerings, and we have to learn to speak engineer in this business. So I think that's the beginning, the foundations. But then after that, it really is trying to understand, three basic components. I always say marketing is simple, but it's not always easy. You have to understand who you're talking to, what keeps them up at night, and then how do you solve that problem better than anyone else in the world? So we break it down to those basics. You can go in and start thinking about those. Who is this target audience? What really is the problem we're trying to solve? And sometimes it's a little different wrinkle than what the features that were engineered into the product do. It's about telling that story. And so I think that's really where we start here.
Yeah. So basically it's like the same for all businesses. I mean, the basic understanding of what they need, what's, as you mentioned, what's make them stay awake at night, and trying to find the solution, the optimum solution for them.
Yeah. And then once you understand some of the complexities of, oh, wow, this is a 3-year sales cycle. Okay, well, now this gets a little more challenging, right? So you say, okay, well, look, how do we build content if we know it's going to be a 3-year sales cycle or 2-year or whatever that number is, let's just plan for it straight off the bat. So we know that we're going to need content to support the salespeople in that long sales cycle. I'm one of the marketers who's done business development as well as marketing. And there's nothing worse than picking up the phone and going, are you ready to buy from me yet, please? And so, I think that, but it's much easier to say, hey, we just did a webinar and I'd really like to invite you and your whole procurement team to this because I think you'll get a lot of value out of it. Or check out this latest case study we did for a company much like you that has a similar problem that you have. I would like to send that over to you, or those kinds of things to help keep the, add value during that long sales cycle and continue to educate the client and kind of push things along, especially in industries like yours where, there's a lot of education required and a lot of misinformation out there. And you've got worthy competitors that are knocking on the door of the customers every day
That's
too.
true.
So
Yeah.
you got to keep them out of there and keep your story fresh with them, because customers sometimes can believe the last person that was in their office.
That's true. Perfect.
All right. Well, I'm excited to see the hydrogen future and see how it all plays out. And I know you guys are going to be on the front runners as that all develops. And I'm looking forward to seeing more success from John Cockerill and you, Claire.
I hope so. And it was really nice chatting with you. Thank you for having me in your podcast.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing, sharing, or spreading the news about us on your favorite channel. Thank you for tuning into Above the Clouds, Stories from the Boardroom. Until next time, stay above the clouds.